You have disappointed me for the last time. Consider yourself no longer my daughter.
The first words my mother said to me on my 25th birthday were not "Happy birthday. We only kept you for the tax benefits." She said it lightly, smiling over the rim of her wine glass as if she had just delivered a clever joke. The restaurant around us buzzed with the usual Friday night noise, cutlery clinking, low conversations, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the bar, but at our table, everything went silent. My father stared down at his steak. My older sister Lauren pressed her lips together, her eyes darting toward the exit like she was already calculating the fastest way to make this moment disappear. 6 words. That was all it took to fracture 25 years of memories. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't cry, though I could feel something cold and sharp spreading through my chest like cracked ice. Most people would have stood up, stormed out, maybe thrown a drink in someone's face. I understood that instinct completely. But I had spent the last 8 months preparing for this exact moment. And I had not come to this table alone. My name is Natalie Carter. I am 25 years old, and until about a year ago I believed I had a perfectly ordinary family in Denver, Colorado. My father, Richard Carter, ran a regional logistics company, the kind of business built on handshakes, old favors, and careful appearances. My mother, Diane Carter, was known in her social circle for charity galas and the specific cruelty that hides inside curated kindness. My older sister Lauren had always been the golden child, confident, polished, effortlessly certain that the world was built for people exactly like her. And me? I was the quiet one. The afterthought. The daughter who asked too many questions as a child and learned, slowly and painfully, that answers rarely came. There had always been small things that didn't quite add up. I looked nothing like either of my parents. My hair was darker, my bone structure different, my eyes a shade that appeared nowhere else in the family. When relatives visited during the holidays, conversation seemed to flow around me rather than include me, the way a river moves around a stone. When photo albums came out, there were dozens of pictures of Lauren as a baby, first steps, first birthday, first everything. Very few of me. When I asked about it once, at age 9, my mother told me the camera had broken that year. A simple explanation. The kind children accept because they want to. I accepted it. But children are remarkably skilled at explaining away their own doubts. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself families were messy and imperfect. I told myself love didn't have to look the same for everyone. I believed that story for most of my life. Until 8 months ago. It started with a letter. I had just come home from work, an administrative coordinator role at a small legal consulting firm, when I noticed an envelope in my mailbox. Thick paper. Official letterhead. A return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page. And a name that would quietly unravel everything I thought I knew. Margaret Ellison. The letter explained that Margaret Ellison had passed away several weeks earlier. According to the document, I had been named as a beneficiary in her estate. The attorney handling the matter, a man named Daniel Reeves, requested I contact his office at my earliest convenience. I stood in the hallway of my apartment building for a long time, reading the letter twice, then a third time. I assumed it was a mistake. I had never heard the name Margaret Ellison. She meant absolutely nothing to me. But curiosity, once it wakes, is very hard to put back to sleep. 2 days later, I sat across from Daniel Reeves in a quiet conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown Denver office building. The room smelled faintly of paper and old wood. Outside the window, the city moved on without knowing anything was changing. Daniel had calm gray eyes and the measured voice of someone who had delivered complicated truths many times before and understood that the delivery mattered as much as the information itself. He slid a thin folder across the table. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "Margaret Ellison was your biological grandmother." The world did not explode in that moment. It tilted. Slowly. Irreversibly. According to the documents in that folder, my mother Diane had been Margaret Ellison's daughter by a first marriage, a marriage my mother had apparently erased entirely from her personal history before I was old enough to ask questions. When I was born, something had gone seriously wrong between them. Serious enough that Margaret had petitioned the court for emergency guardianship of me when I was just 6 months old. She lost. The court sided with my parents, citing stability and established household income. Margaret was granted no visitation rights. She was, in the cold language of the legal ruling, considered an unnecessary disruption to the child's adjustment period. That child was me. What followed were years of quiet legal appeals and private investigations that went nowhere. And finally, a decision Margaret made alone in an attorney's office somewhere around the time I turned 2 years old, a decision born not from defeat but from patience. She created a private trust. Not for my parents. Not for Lauren. Just for me. The terms were deliberate and specific. The trust would remain entirely hidden until my 25th birthday. On that date, I would gain full legal control over its assets, along with access to every document Margaret had spent 2 decades quietly and meticulously collecting. Financial records. Court filings. Correspondence. And a detailed handwritten explanation of why she believed, from the very beginning, that my parents had never truly wanted me at all. I remember sitting in that conference room long after Daniel Reeves finished speaking. The city skyline filled the window in front of me, all glass and late afternoon light, while something inside me went very still and very quiet. Pieces of my childhood were rearranging themselves without my permission, small moments, half-remembered comments, the particular way my mother's eyes sometimes moved past me rather than toward me, all of it clicking into a new shape. A darker shape. But a clearer one. 8 months. That was how long I had known. 8 months of reading files late at night by lamplight, long after my apartment fell quiet. 8 months of sitting across from my parents at Sunday dinners and watching them with new eyes. 8 months of understanding that the people who raised me had been hiding far more than awkward family history. So when my mother lifted her wine glass at my birthday dinner and said, "We only kept you for the tax benefits," she believed she was humiliating me. She thought she was delivering a wound that would land cleanly, the way her words always had. She believed she was finally saying the quiet part out loud. What she didn't know was that Daniel Reeves was already in the restaurant. He had been here for 40 minutes. And everything that happened next was entirely legal. The first person to break the silence after my mother's comment was Lauren. "Oh my God, Mom," she said, letting out a small laugh that sounded forced and brittle. "You can't say things like that in public." But she was smiling. Not shocked. Not upset. Just faintly embarrassed, like someone watching a friend trip on a curb and hoping no one else noticed. The smile of someone who had witnessed Diane Carter's cruelties before and learned that the fastest way through them was to laugh and move on. My father finally looked up from his plate. He cleared his throat, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and spoke in the tired, negotiating voice he used whenever family tension needed to be quietly managed before it became inconvenient. "Diane," he muttered. "That wasn't necessary." He didn't deny it. Not one of them said it was a joke. I sat watching them carefully, feeling something strange and steady settle over me, not anger. That had burned itself out months ago, somewhere around page 40 of Margaret's files, on a Tuesday night when I had finally understood the full shape of what had been done. What I felt now was clarity. The particular kind that arrives when a lifetime of confusion finally resolves into a single coherent picture. My mother leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass with theatrical boredom. "Oh, relax," she said. "Natalie's not going to cry about it." She turned to me and raised one eyebrow. "Right, Natalie?" I held her gaze. For years, I had avoided confrontation with her. Diane Carter specialized in subtle humiliation, the kind that arrives dressed as parenting, as concern, as a gentle observation delivered in front of others. She was very good at making people feel small without ever raising her voice. It was almost an art form. But tonight, for the first time, I noticed something she couldn't completely hide. She was nervous. Not visibly. Not enough for Lauren or my father to catch it. But Margaret's notes had trained me to read the fine details, the tapping fingers that stopped whenever someone looked at her hands, the slight shift of posture when control began slipping, the way Diane's eyes kept drifting toward the restaurant entrance as though she were checking an escape route she had mentally mapped earlier. Interesting. I let a few seconds pass. Long enough to feel the silence. No, I said calmly. I'm not going to cry. Lauren exhaled and reached for her water glass, visibly relieved. See? Natalie gets your sense of humor. Humor. I reached for the bread basket and broke off a small piece, taking my time, letting the moment breathe. Across the room, Daniel Reeves sat at a corner table with two colleagues, a forensic accountant named Voss who had spent 20 years unraveling financial fraud, and a trust administrator who had overseen the Ellison account since Margaret first created it. They were not watching us directly. They didn't need to. Everything tonight was being documented. Not covertly. Legally. Under the terms of the Ellison Trust, the formal disclosure had to occur in the presence of independent witnesses who could confirm that the meeting had not been coerced and that I had acted of my own free will. Margaret had anticipated resistance. She had anticipated manipulation. She had anticipated that my parents would find a way to reframe the evening the moment they were alone with me. She had thought of everything. She had spent 20 years thinking of everything. I set down the bread and wiped my fingers with my napkin. You're actually right about something, Mom, I said. She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she suspected a trap but couldn't see it yet. Oh. You didn't keep me because you wanted me. The table went still again. A different stillness this time, heavier, with edges. My father frowned slowly. Where is this coming from? He asked. Lauren set down her water glass. Can we not do this tonight? We came here to celebrate. Celebrate. I reached into my bag and removed a thick envelope. The leather strap creaked softly as I placed it on the tablecloth between the plates and glasses, not opening it yet. Just setting it there. My mother's eyes moved to it instantly. There it was again. That nervousness, sharper now. You know, I said quietly, I used to wonder why I never met my grandmother. Why no one ever mentioned her. Why there were no letters, no birthday cards, no phone calls from anyone on Mom's side of the family. 3 expressions shifted at once. Lauren looked confused, genuinely so, the way she looked when a conversation turned to something she had no map for. My father went completely still. And the color drained from my mother's face so quickly it was almost remarkable to watch. What grandmother? Lauren asked. Margaret Ellison, I said. My biological grandmother. The words landed on the table like something dropped from a height. My father's voice sharpened immediately. Where did you hear that name? But my mother already knew. I could see it in her eyes, not surprise but recognition, the particular look of someone watching a thing they buried a long time ago rising slowly back to the surface. 8 months of carefully kept secrets had just stepped into the light. I placed the envelope on the tablecloth and left it there, unopened, while I spoke. About 8 months ago, I received a letter from an estate attorney. Margaret Ellison had passed away and named me as a beneficiary in her will. I paused. That was how I found out she existed. Lauren turned slowly to our parents. Who is Margaret Ellison? She asked again, her voice quieter now. Neither of them answered. She was Mom's mother, I said. From her first marriage. I found the court documents. Lauren blinked. Mom, you had a first marriage? That has nothing to do with tonight, my mother said. It has everything to do with tonight, I said. I opened the envelope and placed the first document on the table. A birth certificate, mine, with a legal amendment issued shortly after my birth. A second page was attached, stamped and notarized. Lauren leaned forward and read the header aloud. Petition for emergency guardianship. She looked up. What is this? Daniel Reeves rose from his table across the room. His two colleagues followed. They moved without hurry, 3 people crossing a restaurant floor while the rest of the Friday evening continued around them, indifferent and ordinary. My father noticed them first. His eyes tracked them across the room with the focused attention of a man who spent his career reading rooms. Who are those people? He asked. The estate attorney for Margaret Ellison, I said. And 2 colleagues. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass until her knuckles changed color. Daniel stopped beside our table and gave a polite nod. Good evening, Miss Carter. Happy birthday. Thank you, Daniel. My mother looked up at him, her voice sharp and controlled. This is a private dinner. You cannot simply walk over to someone's table. With respect, Mrs. Carter, I was invited. He set a document on the table beside mine. Miss Carter turned 25 today. Under the terms of the Ellison Trust, that makes her the sole legal authority over its assets, effective as of this morning. He slid a single page forward. The number printed across the bottom was large enough to read from across the table. Lauren whispered it aloud, almost involuntarily. $4.8 million. The table fell into a silence unlike any that had come before it. My mother stared at me as though she were genuinely seeing me for the first time in 25 years, not the quiet daughter, not the afterthought. Something else entirely. Lauren was the first to find her voice. That's not possible, she said. Natalie works at a legal office. Administrative coordinator, I said again, the same quiet correction I had offered earlier. Lauren shook her head slowly, not dismissively this time, more like someone trying to clear water from their ears after surfacing from somewhere very deep. My father had not moved. His eyes were fixed on the document the way I had seen him study unfavorable contracts, looking for the clause that changed everything, the exit that would allow him to walk away with the leverage he came in with. There wasn't one. Mr. Reeves, he said carefully, my daughter has no documented legal connection to Margaret Ellison's estate. Whatever this woman believed about our family, she had no standing to involve Natalie in her financial arrangements. She had every standing, Daniel said. She was Natalie's biological grandmother. And the trust was created within the full authority of Colorado estate law. The documentation is complete and has been reviewed by 3 separate attorneys over the past 2 decades. My father turned to me. Natalie. Whatever version of history this woman fed you, whatever story she constructed over the years, you're only hearing one side. I read both sides, I said. I read everything. I pulled a second document from the envelope and placed it on the table. A tax filing. 1998, my father's company name at the top, a row of numbers running down the page. And one line highlighted in yellow near the bottom. Lauren squinted at it. $240,000, she read. What is this? The adoption tax credit your parents claimed the year they adopted me, I said. Lauren looked up very slowly. Adopted? The word stayed in the air. My mother's voice came out flat and careful. That document is confidential. It was, I said. It became part of the court record during the guardianship proceedings. Margaret obtained a certified copy legally. Lauren looked at my father. She's adopted? He said nothing. I've known for 8 months, I said. I didn't say anything because I needed to understand the full picture before anyone could manage the story. That landed exactly where I intended. Lauren turned slowly toward my parents, something shifting behind her eyes. Is it true, she asked. You adopted Natalie for tax relief? My father exhaled slowly, the sound of a man recalibrating. It is more complicated than that, he said. Then explain it, Lauren said. He rubbed his temples. The company was in serious trouble. 2 distribution centers facing foreclosure. Suppliers pulling credit lines. Banks tightening. We were weeks from collapse. His voice was measured and practiced, the investor relations tone, the one designed to make a bad situation sound like a calculated risk that almost anyone would have taken. The adoption tax credits, combined with dependent deductions, created enough financial relief to stabilize operations for 18 months. It bought us time. Lauren stared at him. You adopted a baby to save a business. We gave a child a home, my mother said sharply. We raised her. Fed her. Educated her. Put a roof over her head for 25 years. That counts for something. You gave her a function, Lauren said quietly. It was the truest thing anyone had said at the table all evening. My mother opened her mouth and closed it again. Something in Lauren's face had changed, the social ease she always carried, that smooth certainty of someone who had never had real reason to question her footing, was gone. What had replaced it was rawer, and more honest, and I thought in that moment that it might be the beginning of Lauren becoming someone she had never needed to be before. There's more, I said. I placed the 3rd document on the table. It was not a tax record. It was a handwritten letter, 2 pages, in handwriting that was sharp and deliberate, every word chosen carefully, the way someone writes when they know the document may outlast them, when they are writing not just for a reader but for a moment they will never be alive to see. At the top, underlined once, if anything ever happens to me, Natalie must know the truth. Lauren picked it up. She read in silence for almost a full minute. The restaurant hummed around us, a server passing with plates, a couple at a nearby table laughing softly, glasses touching somewhere in a toast. All of it completely unaware. Then Lauren looked up at my father with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not anger, not shock exactly, but the particular look of someone discovering that the ground beneath their feet has always been hollow and that every step they took was built on something they were never told about. What is the missing fund? She asked. My father's posture changed. The investor relations composure shifted into something tighter. Lauren, there's a line here about $2 million, she said. From 2002. It says the money was moved out of the company accounts just before the annual audit. And the receiving account, she stopped. Read it again. The account is registered in the name Natalie Carter. Silence. Dad. He didn't answer. Dad. Her voice was harder now, stripped of the careful neutrality she had maintained all evening. A $2 million transfer into an account under my sister's name. She was 4 years old. What was that? My father picked up his napkin, set it down again, a small fidgeting gesture so out of character that it told me everything about how rattled he was. The company needed liquidity quickly, he said finally. There were reporting thresholds that would have triggered a regulatory audit we couldn't survive at that point. Moving funds through a trust account registered under a dependent allowed us to defer the exposure while we restructured. To hide it, Lauren said. To defer it. Under a 4-year-old's name. He didn't argue. My mother's face had gone entirely unreadable, the expression she wore when a social situation had moved so far beyond her control that performance was no longer useful. Daniel Reeves cleared his throat gently. There is something important to clarify, he said. Everyone looked at him. The account was discovered by Margaret Ellison during her private investigation in 2003. She immediately engaged her own legal team and filed for a court-ordered asset freeze, on the grounds that the account had been created using a minor's identity without lawful guardianship authorization. He paused, letting the language sit. The court agreed. The account was frozen. Your parents were never able to access or move those funds again. My father closed his eyes for a brief moment, just one, and I saw something in his face that I had never seen there before in 25 years. Something that looked almost like exhaustion. For 23 years, Daniel continued, the frozen balance accumulated interest and market growth. The initial $2 million, compounded over 2 decades, became the figure you see in front of you. Lauren looked at the number again. $4.8 million. She looked at me. All this time, she said softly. That money was just sitting there. Waiting, I said. For you. For today. Lauren set the letter down carefully on the table, as though it were something that needed to be handled gently. She folded her hands and looked at them for a long moment, the way people do when they are re-examining things they thought they understood. When she looked up, she didn't speak to my parents. She spoke to me. I didn't know, she said. Any of it. I want you to know that. I know, I said. I thought you were just the quiet one. Her voice tightened around the edges. The one who kept to herself. Who preferred her own company. I told myself that was just who you were. She laughed once, a brief and humorless sound. I never once stopped to ask myself why. I didn't answer that. There was nothing useful I could say, and Lauren wasn't asking for a response. She was beginning to understand something, and that understanding needed space. My mother made one final attempt. She leaned forward, her voice softened to the register she used at charity fundraisers, warm, composed, designed to make you feel that the reasonable thing, the gracious thing, the mature thing, was whatever she was about to suggest. Natalie, she said. I understand why this feels like a betrayal. But you have to understand the circumstances. Everything your father and I did, we did too. Protect this family. To keep it intact. If the company had gone under, we would have lost the house. Lauren's school. Everything we had spent years building. Including the stability you grew up with. I listened to the full thing. Then I said, you used my name to hide money from auditors. You adopted me to qualify for a tax credit that kept a failing business alive. And when I was born, your own mother loved me enough to go to court to take me away from you. I paused. The court said no. She spent 20 years making sure that when I finally found out the truth, I would also have the means to do something with it. My mother opened her mouth. I don't need you to reframe it, I said quietly. I needed to understand it. And now I do. I gathered the documents back into the envelope, taking my time, letting the silence hold. My father's voice came out very quiet. What are you going to do? For years, that question would have frightened me. It carried the weight of everything they could still mobilize, family pressure, social reputation, the slow machinery of people who had spent decades controlling the way information moved through a room. Tonight it felt simple. Almost light. I'm going to do what Grandma Margaret intended, I said. Build a life that belongs entirely to me. I stood and picked up my bag. My mother looked up quickly. Natalie, I'll be in touch through Daniel's office, I said. When I'm ready. I looked at Lauren last. She was still at the table, both hands wrapped around her water glass, staring at the candle at the center of the table the way people stare into something when they are not really seeing it at all, when what they are actually doing is looking inward, replaying things, measuring distances. She was going to be all right, I thought. Lauren had always been resilient underneath the ease and the certainty. She had just never needed to find it before. Tonight had changed that. Tonight had changed many things. Call me, I said quietly. When you're ready. She nodded, once, without looking up. I walked toward the exit. The restaurant noise closed in around me, clinking glasses, a low burst of laughter from the bar, someone at a nearby table telling a story. That made everyone lean in. All the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Friday night in Denver, completely indifferent to the fact that a family had just come apart at it seems 3 tables from the window. Outside, the March air was cold and clean and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Breathed it in. 25 years old today. For the first time, I felt the full weight and width of that, not as a burden, not with the quiet persistent ache of growing up in a house where you were useful but never truly wanted, never the child someone had chosen out of love rather than convenience. Just the possibility of it. All that open space ahead, belonging entirely to me. I started walking. Behind me, the restaurant windows glowed warm against the dark street. Inside, the Carter family sat in silence. I had spent 8 months imagining this moment. Sometimes I thought it would feel like revenge, clean and sharp and satisfying, the kind of ending that closes a story neatly. Other times I thought it would feel like grief. I had, after all, just lost something. The version of my childhood I had carried for 25 years, imperfect as it was, had finally and completely dissolved into something I could not reassemble. What it actually felt like was simpler than either of those things. It felt like the first breath after a very long time underwater. Margaret Ellison had never met me as an adult. She had never heard my voice or known what kind of person I had become. But she had watched over me from a distance the only way the courts would allow her, through documents, through records, through the slow and patient accumulation of truth. And when she could not be there herself, she made sure someone else would be. She had given me the truth. She had given me the means. The rest was mine to do with as I chose. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking, the city opening up ahead of me in all directions, bright and indifferent and full of possibility. 25 years old today. It was a very good day to begin. If Natalie's story stayed with you, I'd love to know, in the comments, tell me, would you have walked away quietly, or would you have needed that moment? At the table? There's no wrong answer. And if you believe that the quietest people often carry the deepest strength, consider subscribing to Still Waters Payback. New stories every week.